COVID-19 period. And we've had 2 presentations, plus Richard Anderson this morning from WorkSafe. But now we're going to, just give me 1 minute, but we'll be introducing Bree from BG Consulting to tell her story and provide some lessons for everybody to take away as well. But before that, a bit of housekeeping. We'll respect the presenters by putting yourselves all on mute. And if you can't, a few of us from the Quality Council have got the ability to do that for you. Unless anybody objects, this will be recorded. So I think Andrew or Richard will be recording this. So that goes for the presentation and the audio. And for the benefit of all attendees, if you could go to full screen for the benefit of the presentation, then you'll see what the words and pictures that have been put up. And let the presenters present. If you've got any questions that pop into your mind during the presentation, put them into chat, and I'll come back at the end for the Q&A and read them out on your behalf. And if we've got a bit of time and there's not so many questions, then we'll open it up to have a bit of open mic. And for the benefit of Bree, I'll give you a 5-minute warning when we come into that end of time, all right? So sure. I'll try and pick an opportune moment just to say.
Perfect.
All right, so with that, I'd like to hand over to you to introduce yourself and share your screen, and we'll go from there, and I'll go on mute.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Before I start, I just want to pay my acknowledgement to the owners of the lands on which I broadcast from today, which is the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and future. I was delivering a training session just before lockdown, actually. I was delivering LGBTI inclusion training, and there was a young guy called Geordie from the Wadawurrung Co-op who was delivering some cultural awareness training. And he was talking about the lack of Indigenous knowledge and history in our education system still. And, obviously when I was growing up, it was horrific in terms of the way the history of this country was presented, but it has improved a lot, but there's also still a lot to go. And there was a guy in the audience who actually said to Geordie, well, what are you doing about that? And Geordie, as quick as a flash, he's 21, a very sharp guy, and he just shot back quick as a flash, what are you doing about that? And it just really resonated to me, that simple message that, right, well, what are we doing about that? Who's written a letter to their minister or talked to their local school about the curriculum and how it encompasses Aboriginal knowledges and the true history of this land? And it's something that's just so simple and easy for us to do as people with white privilege in this country. So I like to kind of add that to my acknowledgement in terms of something that people can go and do that is practically, that is creating practical inclusion, which segues into my business, because that's what my business is about, creating inclusion in businesses, in schools, sporting clubs, whatever setting it may be, but doing it in a practical way that makes sense and that really benefits everybody who comes into contact with that organisation. Before I go on to my pivot story, it is also important that I acknowledge that this week is Bisexual Awareness Week. And I am bisexual. I came out about 4 years ago. And one of the challenges with being bisexual actually is that there is not a lot of visibility. Bisexual people are quite often invisible because our sexuality is assumed to be based upon the person that we're dating, or the gender of the person that we're dating. And if we're not dating anyone, if we're single, our sexuality is quite often assumed to be, it is based upon our gender presentation or our expression of our gender. This is a problem because for young people who are coming to terms with their thoughts and feelings around their sexuality, they don't have role models. There's not bisexual role models for them to look at and to understand and to be able to place themselves. You know, I am okay, and there are people like me, and they live wholesome lives and full lives. And so it's important this week that we recognise that and we raise the visibility of people who are bisexual. So I have hopefully done that, and if you haven't met a bisexual before or been, you know, been in a forum like this where people have spoken about bisexuality, now you do. And so if somebody in your life does grapple with that, or you yourself grapple with that, you've at least got a starting point, and feel free to reach out to me for help in that space. So this day was about pivoting, and I have had to pivot, but I didn't have a lot of time before I was required to pivot. So I launched my business in February and it was interesting timing. I'm going to kind of tell you the story of how I got to that point, but there was a period of time where a strategy and a business plan was developed, and I quickly had to adjust that. So that's why I'm here today. I'm just going to share my screen now. I'm not going to use the slides a lot because I'm not a huge fan of slides. All right, can everybody see that okay? Good to go. So for me to get towards this point where I'm at now, there's kind of been three core themes that have weaved their way through my life and through my career. And one of them has been education. Both my parents were school principals. When I had a curriculum day at school, I went to one of their schools and actually joined in the class. There was no time off for this little student. Education was obviously incredibly important. As an 8-year-old, I think I knew more about the education system than most teachers in the Geelong region. So it really has, you know, it played such a big role in my life from an early stage. I then went into university, and I hadn't even finished the first year of my science degree before I was teaching, and I was teaching primary school kids and high school kids science, and we were running forensic science demonstrations and a whole range of things. And I continued that on, and then started teaching university students first year chemistry, second year chemistry. That kind of kept going, and I did a PhD in chemistry, which is nothing to do with what my business is now. But again, through that, it was about education. At the end of that PhD, I experienced what is unfortunately quite a common story for women who are in the sciences. And it was a fork in the road, a kind of decision. Do you pursue a career in academia that was not going to be conducive with my want to also have children? Or do I jump out and find a role that has more secure employment and has more opportunities for people who do take time out in maternity leave, which is what I took. And we call this the leaky pipeline in the science and tech industry, and particularly it happens in academia quite strongly, is that we certainly see women go into these fields, but they don't stay. They drop off along the pathway, and you end up with the leadership being predominantly male. And so that was an experience I had that kind of started the seeds for where my business has gotten to now. But what I did is I left the PhD and I actually became a business development manager. So I worked with researchers to help them find industry partnerships so that they could get their research out into the real world and creating real impact, but also found industry and businesses and startups who really needed the assistance of researchers. So I spent about 10 years working quite closely with startups, working with researchers who then wanted to commercialise their ideas. And so I learned a lot about the startup world, and I was really, really taken by it, and definitely had ideas straight from the first year of doing that type of work that I wanted to run my own business, but I didn't know what they would be. I got to a stage in that career where there wasn't any further career progression for me, and I needed to transfer my skill set. And it just so happened at that time, a role came up at Deakin University that was looking at the drain, the leaky pipeline, why women do leave the sciences, particularly for Deakin. It was a bit of a demotion for me, but I wanted to transfer my skill set and try something new, and it required all the same skills that I had. So I took that role knowing nothing about equity and nothing about inclusion, but within 3 months I was manager of a team there and was leading the gender equity work for the university, the LGBTI inclusion plan, and also the cultural diversity work. So I did that for a significant period of time and really kind of found my niche. I found what I was really good at because I had stakeholder engagement, I had data and research skills, I had strong communication skills and strategic thinking. So I was really good at this work, and to boot, I was just so passionate about it because I could see the impact that I could have on not just people's individual experiences and how we can reduce barriers for individuals, but also the positive impact this type of work has on a whole organisation. The business benefits to diversity and inclusion are well established now, and that's one great reason you can increase productivity innovation significantly by having diverse and inclusive workforces. But for me, the thing that's even more important is that everybody can be at their best when they work in an inclusive workspace. And not only can they be at their best, their job satisfaction increases dramatically, and it's just a better place to be. And that business then has such a broader impact on society, not just to the individuals in the business, but it also filters out to the rest of the community. So I really found my passion and where I felt that I could have an impact. So at the end of last year, I decided it was time to kind of leave Deakin and start this business, and then a pandemic hit. So the business's goal, and it's written there, and it's certainly what I'm still 100% committed to, is helping businesses increase the diversity of their workforces, but also their client base. But also, and almost more importantly, is creating that inclusive environment where everybody gets the opportunity to thrive and where organisations can benefit from the diverse talent that they have. The initial intention was to really focus on consulting and advisory type services. My biggest strength is in strategy and research and really understanding where an organisation is at and where they can get to with this work and how we practically implement diversity and inclusion work. Quite often that work is seen as a fluffy, nice thing to do on the side and results in women in leadership events or wear purple morning teas, but there's a lot more to diversity and inclusion, and that's not where you see the real change. You see the real change when you do tackle the culture and you tackle policies and processes and really look to shift people's behaviour through tangible and practical actions. So in about April, just before, I think it was March, April, before we got locked down, I had about 5 projects that were about to be signed off, which was really exciting. I couldn't believe how easy this had been initially to get these projects on the go. But we got locked down and overnight they all disappeared. So that was kind of that, that killer moment. Do I give up here? It's bad timing. Perhaps it's time to bench this and go and find a job if I can. I had a long history of secure employment, so of course the fear was really quite strong in my gut that I needed to go and find work. Homeschooling began, which I am fortunate. I have a co-parent, so I have my kids 50% of the time. But a full 5 days of homeschooling and trying to start a business is an incredibly challenging thing to do, as I'm sure there's some who can relate. And so that was a really big challenge. But the thing I noticed is that when it did all happen and we locked down, the training that I had been doing, which was really earmarked as to fill about 20% of my business. That was my strategy, to spend about 20% of my time on training. I enjoy training. I feel I'm quite good at that. But I see that there was more impact in the consulting work. And the training did get all cancelled as soon as things locked down. But within 2 weeks, those training sessions were rebooked and there was more requests coming through to do training. And this kind of really intrigued me. I thought all kind of budgets in the diversity and inclusion space had paused and halted. But it seemed that wasn't necessarily the case. And the other thing I saw happen at the same time was that I had been growing quite a strong social media following, and people were really starting to engage with my content. But the people who were engaging with my content were not the ones that I thought initially would. So I really looked at who was engaging and what kind of market I was attracting. And it was a cohort of people who really not necessarily held leadership roles, but really wanted to see change in their organisations around diversity and inclusion. And they were scientists, they were lawyers, accountants. They didn't hold diversity and inclusion roles necessarily, but they wanted to be empowered to create change in their workplaces. And so I thought, well, potentially there's an opportunity here that not only makes business sense, but also really tackles my why, and that's creating impact. And if I can create more advocates and diversity champions within organisations, then I can have that impact, and hopefully then they're going to manage up and get their leaders to get on board and join in with my work as well. So with all that kind of bubbling away, when it came to this decision, do I job hunt, do I take a part-time role, or do I keep doing the business? And I had some varying levels of advice, and most of them said it was time to find a job and pick this up again later, and that the training space wasn't really going to give me enough income to make this worthwhile. But I sat down and kind of just separated all the fear out and looked objectively at the problem, and I guess turned my scientific mind on and what was the actual reality of the situation. And the reality was I hadn't expected to earn any income in the first year anyway. The advice I'd been receiving was 3 years before you're really generating income. So it didn't make sense for me to go and chase money in terms of a job at this point in time when I hadn't intended to earn any yet anyway. So that was the financial reality, was that I still had that year to be able to work on the business. And this could be a once in a lifetime opportunity. I've done it now. I've built the brand. I've done a lot of the hard yards. It's time to, probably knuckle down and just keep at it. And what I went back to was really that why. And I realized that even if I spend the next year or two and don't earn any income, I'm still actually doing the thing I set out to do, and that's creating change. And I knew I was doing that because I was receiving feedback from presentations and conversations that I had created change for them personally or for their workplaces.
666. 9666. I don't know what that means.
Oh, just getting a bit of noise there. And so, I was still achieving that. So why not keep going while financially I could? So I'm just going to stop the share there, and so that I can chat and see people's faces. And so I thought about this training thing and thought, well, what do I want to do in this space? And I had been delivering inclusive leadership training, which is where I really believe we can make a difference in organisations. Quite often an organisation will have a diversity and inclusion plan or some kind of initiatives in that space, but what they don't do is educate their managers and their employees about how they themselves can enact those plans and be inclusive. And we know from research that 80% of your experience as an employee is dependent upon your direct line manager. And so if we're not educating those direct line managers as to how to be inclusive, then we're never going to achieve those goals and those plans. And inclusion isn't an inherent skill. People aren't just naturally inclusive. It is a skill you have to build and develop and learn and, you know, bounce back.
I'm too old school. I'm too old school.
So, sorry. You've got to bounce back. I've kind of lost my train of thought now. Inclusive leadership. So yeah, I believe it's a skill that you need to learn, and we don't teach that. And so I had been teaching that in a live fashion before things closed down, and I had for a number of years. But now it was time to, I thought, convert that into an online course that could, you know, serve organisations well in this crazy crisis type time where staff could go and do, or managers could go and do this training in their own time. And really, we need this skill now more than ever. And we've seen the incredible gap that's grown over this, 6 to 8 months, in terms of the privilege gap. And we're not all in the same boat. There's some are sitting in leaky dinghies and others are sitting in yachts. And we're seeing the gap, and there's just been data released today to show that overwhelmingly men have received more of the jobs in the last 6 months than women have. And yet overwhelmingly women have lost more employment than men have during this time. And so certainly from a gender perspective, we see that gap widening significantly. And from a socio-economic perspective, we're seeing an incredible widening of that gap as well. And so more than ever, leaders need to be cognizant of their own privilege, of the barriers that different members of their team, of their clients, customers face, because they have to be able to respond to these challenges and really help their staff to get through these difficult times. So at the same time, I had a phone call from a guy who had been following me on social media. He is an expert in disability inclusion in sport. And he's decided to run a business called Impact Leaders, where he's getting people like myself who deliver training in this space, giving us access to a platform that he uses, an online platform. And we're building our courses on his platform, and he's helping to promote and to provide that space for this type of course and collaboration between other trainers in the inclusion space. And he said, are you interested in building your course online? So I said, well, that's exactly what I've been thinking about. So I went ahead and did it, despite again receiving, I don't know if I'm silly, but I received again advice that financially that probably wasn't a smart idea. I should go and get a job. But I'm just so proud of the course that I've built. And I've had a cohort of people go through the course now. So I said yes to him, but on the condition that I would pre-sell the course first. And if I got enough in to make it financially viable, then I would build it with him. And that's what happened. I got the cohort in and built the course. And it's now totally my course. I have all control over that, and it's quite flexible. And it's essentially, people can do it in their own time, but they go through a bunch of video content from me that's on this online platform, and they work with the other people in the cohort as well to share through case studies. And we do some live sessions where we really do the interactive and the storytelling work, and bystander intervention training and things like that need that live interaction. And then at the end of the course, they come up with an action that they're going to take within their organisation, and they get a coaching session with me, and we talk that through and see how they're going to go on and affect change. And of course, that for me is a perfect opportunity to be a real lead magnet. So there's a couple who have gone through that course already who are now talking to me about what work I can go and do in their organisation now as a result of the things that they want to see changed. And it's been really fascinating, the types of people who've engaged with the course. So I had a couple of teachers, which was surprising to me. I've done a lot of work presenting in schools, but I didn't expect this inclusive leadership course to appeal to them. But it has, and they probably got almost the most out of it, looking at all the participants. I had managers from a local accounting firm, and they sent a group of 4 managers in, and all the actions that they're taking on just are so cool. They're simple, They don't cost them anything, but I think they're going to be incredibly effective and impactful, and not only help them internally in the business, but help them build their client base as well. So it's really pleasing to see that feedback and that progress. So since I'm now trying to recruit into the second cohort, and I'm also actively selling this within organisations across the country to get them to sign up their staff, and there's a couple of clients I have that I think are going to put in large cohorts of people through the course, which would just be the perfect win for me out of this whole exercise. I've also now built a LGBTIQA+ awareness program with Joe Bangles, who is the president of Geelong Rainbow Inc. And we've created a program that's specifically for regional Australians. It is a very different experience being queer in regional areas of Australia as opposed to being in big smoke. And there's been this, people have moved to the capital cities for decades. So it's just a drain of queer people out of regional and rural Australia. And we want to kind of jump in there and try and start cutting that down a bit and really creating inclusion in workplaces that very much aren't inclusive of LGBTIQA+. So it's a hard task, and we think we've come up with a model that's really going to have impact. And we took it to my cricket club, Manifold Heights Cricket Club, last week as our trial in terms of the live workshop, because it's a live workshop accompanied by an online module. And yeah, it seemed to land really well. So we're hopeful that that's going to be a real success for us. Time, good. So 5 minutes left. So I'll just get the share back up, so I can jump to the end. So I guess the outcomes, for me are having those products to sell, which I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I know without this pandemic, I wouldn't have stopped and had the time to build this. The other real positive thing for me is that coming from higher education, and I have quite a large profile as a diversity and inclusion person in higher education, that was going to be my core market. And I already had a number of projects lined up in higher ed that all fell off because we know that sector's been hit so hard. This has forced me to look outside that sector, and that's been such a positive for me. So having that course and seeing the teachers, the way they engaged, and seeing the accountants, and seeing that my knowledge is completely transferable into those other industries, that's been a real win for me, and I think will hold me in good stead going forward. Certainly hoping that the higher education market comes back on board, but if it doesn't, I'm hoping that I still have plenty of industries to work with and to market to. The other opportunity for me has been, because we've gone online, all of a sudden I have access to events that I would never have had access to. I can now network so much better than I would have been able to. I'm a single mother, as I said, every second week, so I can't attend events in that week. Well, now not only am I attending events, like I attended a conference on Tuesday, and I felt the networking there was just so incredible, but I've also been able to join boards because the board meetings are online at night time, and I can put my kids to bed and jump on the board. So I was on the Geelong Cricket Association's board, and I'm on their board, and they had their meeting last night, and I would not have been able to do that before this pandemic. And I'm hoping that organisations will find it really hard to shift back to doing everything face to face, because there will be many of us who won't be able to participate in that way. And I think this is just such a great thing to happen for accessibility. And I've built a mailing list, and I've built a social media brand, or at least I've started to, and I'm feeling like I'm starting to get a run with that, and I've had time to do that and learn the skills that I needed. So there you go, to time, I hope. So thank you so much for all listening. I know I didn't have an established business that I had to pivot, but I hope you've picked up something from that may be of value to you going forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Bree. Good job. I mean, you take a look at the chat window, you've got some great support again, and Rob saying love how you took the leap and focused on your core why, right? You stuck with it, you persisted. And I think that comes through from our other presenters as well. It's amazing. You kind of ignore other people that are telling you to go to the easy option, and you stick with your vision and you persist, and then you make it work. I mean, it's just fantastic. Do have a question there from Stephen, I think. What sort of differences do you see in businesses that are good at inclusion and diversity versus those who aren't? And I've got a follow-up question to that in a sec. Yeah,
cool. It's a great question. Gosh, you see a lot of differences, but the thing that stands out for me is I think we don't want to generalize about diversity and inclusion work. Diversity and inclusion is quite specific, right? And so if I go to an organisation and you see that they haven't done anything around diversity and inclusion, and I don't actually ask them about their diversity and inclusion, I ask them what their business challenges are. And so if their business challenge is retention, well, diversity and inclusion will help you there. If your business challenge is you can't attract the right talent, diversity and inclusion. We know that 80% of millennials would prefer to work in an organisation that is LGBTIQA plus inclusion, regardless of whether they identify as LGBTIQA plus or not. This is talent marketing. If their problem is that they are having complaints and there are significant issues within the organisation, then obviously diversity and inclusion work can help there. So in terms of looking at an organisation that's inclusive compared to one that's not, you do see an organisation that is more innovative. And it's not just innovative in terms of, better ideas and greater ideas, it is that, but it's also a better risk mitigation. So there's this excellent research around looking at, there was one particular project that had, they set a group of all women and a group of all men, and they set them a task. And both groups, got to the end of the task and achieved it in a reasonable amount of time. Then they took one woman and put it in the men's team, and they took one man and put him in the women's team. And all of a sudden they saw a lift in the performance of those teams. And so they were measuring the performance based on a few markers that they had. When they mixed up the teams and balanced them, they saw a significant improvement in the way those teams dealt with that particular task. And that's not because men and women think differently. And that's what quite often people get into this idea that it's because, men are from Mars and women are from Venus, or whatever that ridiculous book was. It's not that. It's that we behave differently when we're in a group of people who aren't like us. So if we are in a group of people that don't think just like us, we don't get to group think. We have to sit and debate and talk about the thing for longer. We have to ask more. We ask more questions naturally. And so we consider the task in a more holistic way. We do mitigate risk better. And so that's what you see from businesses that are really focused on this work and implement it properly. Don't do that kind of tokenistic morning tea. Morning teas are great, but that's not what your diversity and inclusion work is.
Well, so my follow-up question was, and you touched on it, was when you get the request or when you have a way into an organisation, right? I guess it's a sort of managerial type level or something. What kind of metrics do you settle on to measure the effectiveness of inclusion before and after your program?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I love data.
I know. I'm over to you.
Look, there are a number of metrics, and it does depend on that specific organisation and what it wants to track. And I think you have to remember that your diversity and inclusion work should be aligned with your business goals. And so measuring the things that actually make sense from a business perspective as well as from a diversity and inclusion perspective is important. So the type of metrics is, yes, you need to get a better handle. Most businesses don't have a great handle around the demographics of their staff. So understanding that, so that if you are looking at representation, if that's an issue you want to tackle, then you need to have that baseline point as to what your representation is. But there's more important data in there too, and I spoke about retention, recruitment, promotions, flexibility, who's working part-time. Now, if I go into an organisation, they say we're super flexible, and they show me that, yeah, they're flexible, they've got 30 women working 0.4, that's not flexibility, because why aren't men working flexible? And part-time doesn't tell me about flexible working. Who's going to pick up their kids, or who has the flexibility that they need to be able to perform at their best? That's the kind of metrics you want to get into, is really understanding, well, what does flexibility mean to them? So then that's a lot about qualitative data collection, because the whole purpose of diversity and inclusion is allowing people to be at their best. And just measuring whether somebody's working full-time or part-time doesn't necessarily tell you that. But combining that data with information around, you know, do people have access to the flexibility that they need? Do they feel comfortable asking their managers for flexibility? That type of thing. It needs to be combined with that more quantitative data. Does that make sense?
Yep, that's all good. I mean, does anybody else have any questions directly for Bree that you just want to voice? Then use the chat. We've got a bit of time. Well, if you haven't, I've got lots of questions actually, Bree. I mean, through your journey, given that it was from like February, right, when the big change, you know, you launched, and it was going to major on, say, face-to-face and direct customer, you know, client interaction and things. Who has helped you? I'm not asking you to name names, but who are the type of people that have helped you the most in pursuing your vision to this point today?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. The person who's had the biggest impact is actually a person who runs a coaching business. She coaches yoga teachers. And it seems completely out of this, you know, completely different, but she's just got this real knack for running businesses. And what I've kind of taken from her is, you know, she is a B2B, you know, she's in a business where she's B2B, but almost yoga teachers are, you know, they're a bit different. You know, she's selling to yoga teachers, she's not selling to corporate organizations. But that's been really useful to get her understanding and knowledge around how to approach that, because when I've had to pivot and look at, you know, how do I target these individuals within the organizations to come and sign up to my course? So it's been interesting kind of combining those different social media approaches and engagement approaches than just the corporate stuff. So I've learned a lot from her. And also at the same time, she's been incredibly just about just keep going. You know, don't be whinging, don't be worrying about what's happening in the background, just keep going. Why not?
Yeah. So part of that journey to, because you effectively gone online, and I guess most of how you promote yourself, I guess, is now through online, right? So, and you said earlier that you connected up with some industry champions, right? So how did that come about? Was that kind of planned? Was that part of your rational thinking about developing a plan and how you can move forward? Or was it a bit more random and just fortunate?
Yeah, it's a bit of both for sure. Fortunately, my content and material is interesting to people. So I get opportunities to come and, you know, give presentations, which I've just been grabbing as much as possible. So the plan initially was to get into as many of those kind of professional associations as possible and present, because people are keen to hear about diversity and inclusion stuff. So I have kind of a nice in there. So I did that initially, and that's kind of build the contact. At the moment, I'm on a very targeted mission. I am going to contact every single diversity inclusion manager in the country, and I'm working my way through them. So I'm using LinkedIn to do that.
So Rob's asking, did you conduct any deeper research once you've noticed which groups were engaging with your content to better understand their needs and shape your decisions?
Yeah, I'm starting to. I'm definitely starting to. So I've kind of, through the course, I've got quite an evaluation process built in there and got a lot of feedback through that, and really I'm mapping out the types of opportunities that each different industry is providing to me. So for example, for education for schools, the teachers are keen, but they don't have a lot of time, and the schools aren't going to then engage in a bigger consultancy project. I've got one consultancy project with a school, but it's not about diversity and inclusion. So for me, yes, there's value in targeting them from a training perspective, but it's not going to build those bigger projects. And I guess that's when, you know, a couple of the people who came through the course were diversity and inclusion managers, and I can just see the opportunity there. So that's why I've targeted in to really tackle the D&I managers, which initially I didn't think that's where I should go. I thought I should go to the organisations that didn't have diversity and inclusion managers and convince them that they needed the work done. But I see now that the orgs that have already started in this space are like more likely to engage on those bigger projects.
That's
so not
really
a lot,
good.
but yeah, in my head.
Yeah, and I think we're all privileged to have you based in Geelong, because you are, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yay, there we go. So if anybody online knows any organisations that might need any help, they know who to contact now for diversity and inclusion. But I think time's up now, Bree, I'm afraid. We're going to take another short break, so stay online this time, everybody else. Got to thank Bree again for joining us and stepping up to present along with some of the other presenters today. But we'll come back in